Time to get started. We have material to get through. And I want to get us through some stuff so that we can get working on our final project, because the end of the quarter is approaching like a train. Want to make sure you have enough time to do your best on this, because the more time you have, the better work that it will be. You don't want this to be rushed, because data is everything. Data is life. It's obvious that I haven't had caffeine. It barely makes sense, and I'm just describing a project. How are we doing? Good. Excellent. So we have our last set of chapters due on Sunday, and then we just have a final project from there. The end is in sight. Not too much left to do.
Is the final paper going to be just due on what our final date would regularly be?
Something like that. I will push it as late as I reasonably can to make sure that I can still get through them all, because again, the more that people can put into it, the better it will be. I guess there is one exam left as well that'll be on the last week, but that's literally everything left in the class.
Have you already posted the requirements for the final paper?
Not quite yet, because I want to get through cost curves. So I don't want people to start until we've covered the content that I want you to apply to Harmony. But I'm trying to get to that as soon as we can, so that you can get started as quickly as possible. So we're finishing this slide deck today. There's one more slide deck, and the slide deck that does that content is the one after that. So hopefully we get through it by the end of the week. That would be ideal. Give you a couple weeks of time. Last time we were still talking about economic systems. We talked about inflation, both supply side inflation and demand side inflation, of what can player bases and designers do to increase the amount of currency that is in a system. Were there any questions on either supply side inflation or demand side inflation? Since I think we had just about covered both of them by the end of last class. All right. As humans, we generally consider inflation to be a bad thing, but in games, inflation by itself is not necessarily a bad thing. And even in economics, inflation isn't necessarily a bad thing. But if players are fairly and equally making more, bringing in more currency, then the amount of purchasing power that any given has compared to the economy as a whole remains the same. And that's what fairness is that everyone with the same amount of resource has the same purchasing power. That said, inflation issues exist when wealthy players hoard a bunch of limited resources. That's not good for the economy at large.
Well, Chris, it'll trickle down to us, Chris.
Don't worry, the billionaires will reinvest into our community.
Exactly.
They're not gonna fly in a plane out of the country.
They'll trickle down on us.
Yes, from their positions above us. Inflation can certainly change if the designers aren't changing the costs to acquire currency or to exchange real money for currency. Then it increases the amount of real world money that you need to pay in order to keep up with that inflation. If designers aren't actively increasing the amount that is provided, the amount of that resource that's provided for the money, then the microtransaction becomes less and less valuable over time. And that can be a problem. But of course, that is some games' entire business model. So there you have it. How do you keep existing players continuing to pay for the game if their prior purchase becomes invalidated by the time that the next purchase rolls around, the next potential purchase rolls around? So with inflation, if you don't go back and balance the beginning levels of your game and increase just the general everything that is dropped throughout the entirety of the game, then when new players play your game, it requires increased amount of effort and work in order to be able to be competitive with the existing player base. And that can make it seem like an exclusive club, and that can affect your player retention numbers, as well as just how many new players you are getting No one will want to start your game if it feels like being competitive is already something that is off the table because they can't get to the point that other players are at. One other demographic to consider are players that used to play your game that would like to come back and play your game again. If they were wealthy when they left, but there's been significant inflation between when they last played the game and when they come back to play the game again, they may find that their wealth is significantly degraded compared to the wealth of other players who were continuing to play during their absence, which they may come back very temporarily, realize that they're not in the same position they were when they left. They didn't understand what's been done to the game in the meantime, and they leave the game again very quickly. So just things to consider from a design perspective with regards to keeping track of inflation. Inflation is not necessarily a bad thing, but when inflation does occur, you should consider the effects on the entirety of the game and the different demographics of players who are playing your game to make sure that you're giving as many of them as possible a reason to return to the game, keep playing the game, to be able to catch up and be a significant member of the economy. But a lot of games don't really have that understanding from an economic perspective of that. How can we remove value resources from a game's economy? Lots of ways to do it. You can add items to purchase from NPCs. If you do this, making the sell costs significantly lower than the buying costs, then resources can be sold but not recuperated at the same rate that people who are buying them from the in-game store are doing. So if the NPC is a middleman, one person sells an item to the NPC, another person buys that item from the NPC. Throughout the course of that transaction, there are the same number of the actual usable item. One was sold and one was purchased, but the amount of in-game currency that was used for this is negative. The cumulative effect on the amount of gold in the economy or something of the sort would be negative. You can add gambling mechanics where players spend money, in-game money, for some unknown item or some unknown something. And players will spend a lot of in-game currency in order to get the thing that they want. And it seems more likely that players are going to engage with a gambling mechanic than if you just make a very expensive item in the first place, because players will think, if I get lucky, then I don't have to spend very much and I'll acquire the same item. You can add durability systems to items, which you have to pay in order to repair your items. And that way you can add a scaling gameplay cost, kind of a per hour in-game currency cost to engaging with the game. Of course, if your game also has what we call hideout warriors that are doing trades on the side, then you're punishing the players who are actually playing the game and acquiring the resources. It may further create a problem with regards to the players who are choosing not to play the game and engage in just trades in the economy-based system. You can add penalties for poor gameplay in ways that there's now a monetary cost to poor performance. When you do this, you should be careful of who you're targeting with that. If you're punishing just low-skill players or those without the currency to afford upgrades, then they may get stuck in a loop where, because they don't have good gear, they die and have to spend money in order to revive themselves so they can never afford the better gear. So you're locking players out and kind of having the players who are good are winning more or are more profitable than those who are less skilled or trying to catch up with those who are more skilled. So you have to be very careful with this.
What's an argument for having a negative feedback loop like that in your game? Do they have there must be some kind of reasoning for those games do that?
It's usually with regards to trying to make some kind of hardcore mechanic. So the penalties for dying that I'm aware of, you can have an experience penalty for dying. Something like the characters can only get to the level that is the skill of the player who is playing them. And that way the currency that is lost is experience rather than something that can be used to trade in for something of value. But it does put a cap at your player level that is based on your player's skill. Interesting idea that becomes enraging in practice, I find, when the level scales to the point where the experience that you lose from dying represents hours of in-game time or real life time playing the game, that immediately makes you want to quit the game, and you're going to have retention issues off of your players getting frustrated. Unless you're targeting a particular demographic of hardcore players who accept that loss as part of the innate nature of the gameplay. You can add options. Some games have options for dying to save you time. Like you can respawn at your corpse for a particular cost, or in town for no cost. And then you're paying for the time that it takes for you to get back to your corpse, rather than it's kind of a privilege rather than forcing paying on death. So lots of possibilities there. Yeah.
Yeah, like in Diablo, you can quit out and get your corpse right next to it and not lose all your gear, but you lose all your money.
Right.
So
We had some kind of interesting
Never
decision with regards to that. Yeah. You can make limited time resources or items that cost a very large amount of resource, with the idea of let's celebrate a real life holiday, and those who have hoarded your resources for the last year, now you can spend those resources on limited time items. That these can even be cosmetic, but it's a great way to sink a bunch of currency out of the game. Just be careful if you have a cycle of something like the only event that I have is on Christmas, then there will be significantly inflated economies right before Christmas and deflated economies right after Christmas that create a really weird yearly cycle of how much money is in the economy at different times of the year. You can add trade fees. Whenever players trade with each other, then there is a certain cost of currency to do this. I think this is an interesting idea that Path of Exile 2 has been playing around with, and now Path of Exile 1 has this as well. The idea of the only way to get the in-game currency is to play the game. And then you have to spend the in-game currency in order to make a resource trade. So you can't just hideout warrior and trade a bunch of resources back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. You eventually have to go play the game to acquire the resource that allows you to engage in the trades. And that's an attempt to prevent botting and profiting off of just botting. I don't know the extent to which that actually has worked. I don't have any of that data, but I see that as a very interesting way of trying to account for that. Yeah.
but back to Diablo and Path of Exile Diablo, these are standard game mechanics in those.
Yeah.
But in Diablo 3, they tried to regulate player trading, and everyone hated it. And everyone was like, "No, we're just going to do it on, forums."
Third-party site, yeah.
Yeah, and kind of regulating like the bots and stuff like that, because the community is so involved.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying, get your hands off this. We want to do it ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Another one is positive sum mechanics, something that is kind of a win more. If your highest performance players are the ones who are capable of farming the most, the fastest, then they're the ones who acquire the wealth. They're the ones who need the wealth the least because they already have the best gear, which is why they can farm the most effectively. So that leads to an inflationary effect where the inflation is coming from the players with the most already. So if you can remove the positive sum mechanics that allow the best characters to perform the best at acquiring those kinds of currencies, then it creates fairness for the rest of the players. But of course, you still want there to be a reason for players to want to acquire the better gear. It just doesn't necessarily have to be acquiring more of that resource faster necessarily. Maybe it increases the drop rate of better gear. Maybe it increases, who knows? There are other mechanics that you can target with that. You can utilize economy resets. A lot of games do this with seasonal content now. The idea of we're going to have a fresh economy that starts from zero. Nobody has anything when this season goes live. And then when the season ends, everyone's characters are reset and or thrown off into some kind of bin season or league where the economy is absolute trash because they're not balancing for that. They're balancing for a temporary 3-month, 6-month season. So again, that's something that you can do. As from a designer's perspective, balancing, adding resources to the economy and sinks to remove resources from the economy is part of good game design. Any examples from people's experience of economies that have been handled either very well or very poorly? Or examples of some good sinks in games?
The only thing that's going through my head this entire time is just like the South Park WoW episode
Mm-hmm.
where they keep getting bodied so that they spend all that time grinding the boars to fill in that sink so they can finally meet that stupid guy and they can play the game.
Yeah,
And I can't really speak to WoW or any of the other games because I don't play a ton of MOBAs or different crawl games. But it's just interesting to see from like an outside perspective, like looking in just like the difference in mindset comparatively.
any others? One of my favorite uses of an in-game sync, I will consistently use Path of Exile, probably because of my 10,000 hours in it, but in Path of Exile, for a long time, there was no gold. Every item has some crafting use. So one of the main trading resources, the Chaos Orb, re-rolls the modifiers of an item. It just strictly acts like it re-drops the item. And you can use many of these items to continuously re-roll and just get random item off the same base. This was useful, but Chaos Orbs started dropping frequently enough. There were so many of them in the economy that the value of them was degraded significantly compared to other currency items. So what they ended up introducing as a sink was the idea of making an end game instance of the game, which usually randomly rolls what extra properties that instance has. But now you can force there to be particular things in that instance, and the cost is a scaling amount of Chaos Orbs based on how good that content that you want to add is. So it's an extra way of creating deterministic farming based off of your ability to spend this resource. And the end game cost of Chaos Orbs ended up being their use in terms of the sink rather than their use in the ability to reroll items. So there were multiple ways to use the same item, and the cost of that item becomes the ceiling of how useful the item is for that particular mechanic. So you can always add more things that an item can do, and then the economy adapts to that. Of course, the downside to that is if you want to use the item for its other purpose, you're doing it at a cost that is not the value of that outcome. It's the value of the other outcome that is dictating its economic value. And that's the downside of that. Yeah.
Similar thing with Diablo 2, where before like the torches as a mechanic were included, which are just charms that almost always give you like character skill increases.
Right.
Like on the forums, armor and weapons with those skill increases just became insanely expensive. People would trade in people would spend in like insane amounts of real money on these things. And I think Blizzard kind of caught wind of that. So they added the torch mechanic, which essentially is like all these things you're trying to farm for. There's now just every single time you beat a Diablo clone or some like insanely hard boss, now you have a chance of rolling these. So it takes that whole element where you're like, you can still get good gear, and it's not all on these forms by trading your resources as opposed to real money. And it's not all about these +2 to all sorcerer skills, you know. So we're taking that out of it. And then the same thing happened with the torches. It didn't really work out, but yeah. It was an attempt.
Yeah. Game designers are always finding ways to mess around with your expectations, to mess around with these ideas. So
It's kind of inevitable though, in a way. Like unless you want every item to have like the same sort of utility, it's like unless it's like perfectly balanced where there's like no incentive to getting anything, it's like you're always gonna run into these kind of issues.
oh yeah, absolutely. It's just a matter of once it becomes a big enough problem, then the developer needs to do something about it in order to sort of cut back on using the idea of chaos orbs. Once you have 10,000, 20,000 chaos orbs floating around in your inventory, what is the point of acquiring more of them? You can't trade them aside from 500 to 1 for a large scale item that it's like why even click to pick them up at that point?
I mean, I don't really play these kinds of games and stuff like that, but like if there's like certain items that are particularly good, like a sword or like a suit of armor or something like that,
Yeah,
couldn't you just introduce competing swords and suits of armor that are equally valuable in unique scenarios, and then that way there's more reason to grab multiple things, I guess.
that would be nice, but it doesn't get the currency out of the system.
Hmm.
So maybe you have the cost of one or the other of these good things, you're going to become a million gold or 10 million gold or 100 million gold as the inflation happens. And if you're not balancing around the fact that monsters drop 100 gold, then what is it that's creating the gold? There's something that's causing that inflation. The gold is not leaving the economy in some sense. So there's just more gold floating around. Who has all of that gold? The people who farmed the items over time that they've sold to accumulate that wealth. A new player has to spend a ton of time farming things that are going to be valuable enough to get small pieces of that to be able to make any kind of dent in the wealth of players who've been playing for a
Well, I
long
guess on
time.
that topic, because I used to play a lot of like Guild Wars 2, they would put rare items in more dynamic events. Like more, they would put the coveted items in less difficult areas. They might have like a lower drop rate, but like they just spread it out. So you can be a new person and you could just keep stumbling upon really great stuff. And then that way it's like you can still get good stuff.
Yeah.
Without having to have the right gear to join the right group.
Yeah, and that point, just take the currency out of the system completely, and the currency is more of a barter system of, I have this really good sword, what can I get for this really good sword that I don't really have a use for? The in-game currency's goal is to have some kind of liquid value of, I don't want to barter, figure out what you have that adds up to the sum of the value of this really good sword. Just give me this amount of gold. But if the game is always producing more gold, but gold doesn't leave the economy in any sense, then I have no reason to want to trade this sword today because that amount of gold in 1 year won't be worth it. So the goal would be to introduce sinks for gold as frequently as gold is being dropped, so that there's always the same amount of gold cumulatively in the economy.
Gotcha.
So that you're willing to sell the sword for gold because you will have that gold will have the same value or close to the same value in a year as it does today. Something like that. Yeah, it's hard to create an entire system like that works and works well. All right, open and closed economies. An open system is just one where the internal parts of it, what's inside the system, can be directly influenced by elements that are outside of the system. And a closed system is entirely self-contained. There's no ability to be influenced by anything outside of its system. So let's take a look at what kinds of game economies are open and which ones are closed. Anyone have an example of a game that you've played that has an open economy or an open system or a closed system for their economy?
I mean, the closed system would be any single player game now, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't even imagine like an open system outside of like an MMO or something like that.
Yeah, where you pay real money for some kind of benefit. So real money is one aspect of an open system that could be some way that you acquire the resource of the system in exchange for something else. What are some other ways?
I mean, could it be, this might be like too loose, but like, you know, lots of those MMOs, they have different servers depending on what kind of continent you are. And some of those servers are really unpopulated, so their economies are kind of destroyed in a way.
Yeah,
Whereas they have other, more populated servers, like there's way more options, way more availability of rare items, and like more gold's flowing.
sure. That happened from within the system.
Yeah, okay.
There's no flow of something from outside of the system to within the system.
So I guess I was thinking like players, like if that
Yeah.
game's popular, there's more people playing it. But
Yeah, it definitely would affect the economy for sure. So money can be what goes in and out of a system. Can it be effort? Can it be work of some kind? Yeah,
Like you was just saying, the areas. Have a game that has items or something. And have to have a certain number of what you invoke to generate income. more people playing the game, that this is the economy, out of course. When they're not, people, more people playing around, people playing,
Yeah, it's still technically, I think, within the system. It's within the confines of the economic system itself. Yeah,
So if like. If effort is an external resource. I'm thinking like something like, grinding for resources, that's turning effort into things in the game economy, but that still feels like part of the closed system.
yeah. Well, it could be something like, instead of paying you to grade for me, I'll give you items in the game.
Hmm.
Where you could exchange something inside of the game's economy for something outside of the game's economy. So I'll leave you with this really silly idea that's, if some of you go do, I really want to hear the stories of. Next time you host a board game, allow for the exchange of real money for in-game benefits. And just see how that goes. I really want to hear stories about this, because that's taking the idea of a closed system whenever you play the game by the rules and just say, how much does it really mean for you in order to have this? What does it really mean to trade with me right now? Are you willing to allow for the exchange of resources that are outside of this economy? What is the exchange rate between the in-economy system resources in a board game and resources in real life? Of course, the detriment is that you'll probably lose the game, and maybe your friends as well, depending on how this goes. But hey, maybe you can profit off of it in some way, shape, or form. So it's much easier from a design perspective to balance and design both systems. It makes sense. If you don't allow for anything flowing into and out of the economy, you have total control over the balance, what players can and can't do. But when it's an open system, you completely lose control over the economy. But at the same time, maybe there's some benefit to that is useful, ? That said, you can still balance an open economy in some ways. I'll leave this as a question. How can we balance the ability to pay for in-game benefits where players are spending vastly different amounts of money? So think of this in terms of the free-to-play question. How do you balance having some whales playing your game and some players who are attempting to play it free-to-play or very close to free-to-play?
You just make the things you're buying being aesthetic. I don't know if that's strictly a benefit. I guess you look cool. Does that count?
Yeah, it is one way you could do it. Is it going to be as profitable? Sure, it leads to good balance.
Yeah, and the payoff can only be like a slight up, so you can still win with skill overall, but it just,
Decrease the ability, like paying doesn't do quite as much.
yeah.
Sure.
You can make it so like pay things or like if make the game more cooperative where players work together and a person who pays for benefits, I get like a minor share of the benefits to other people that played with them.
Interesting.
It makes it makes people who pay money look better. You're a good guy, everyone likes you.
Yeah, you're the leader of your party because you are the reason that you are buffing everybody else
Instead
in
of
your
it being,
party.
oh, this person's paying money now they're doing better than me and I'm mad at them. Oh, this person's paying me for help.
Yeah.
Player.
And that's useful in a massively multiplayer environment because then you can balance difficult raids at the level of we expect there to be someone who's paid for this and a bunch of leechers to that are also getting the benefit from the paid player. Everyone goes together to do this, and that way there are ways to play the game free to play, but in order to defeat the dungeon or the raid, someone has to be paying for it.
So like bosses and systems like that can be made harder in a way where if you pay money, you might have more freedom in how you do it, but if you don't, you can essentially use the benefit of someone who has.
Yeah.
What about like strategy, even if you can pay for different strategies, they're not necessarily superior strategies, but they're different strategies. Like you mentioned Clash Royale, and that's a horrible example because all of that because you pay for the best strategies. But what if they were like, no, you can pay for these particular strategies, but everything is still equal when you get down to the idea of strategies.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that idea, I have some games where you're doing some of this generation. And so you would have to queue, if you find trees, you set two things to queue. So you pay to set and.
Yeah,
And so in that way, it gives you a benefit, but it doesn't follow these. Dedication to anybody else.
sure.
It's just kind of
Yeah.
Maybe money could just reduce time. Like everything that you could acquire, you could still do it without money. But it would just take you longer.
Sure.
Yeah, or like, I know this is still not like something that's like super free to play like friendly. But like the people who are paying would just basically have like a time advantage. So something that would normally take a long time amount of grinding, the paid player just gets access to it earlier than everyone else does. And you just have to hope that the game balanced around that there being an advantage is at least okay.
Sure. So here are some ideas. First, that you could limit the amount of spending that is allowed. So you can borrow the idea from something like competitive poker. Everyone starts with the same number of chips, and then strategy takes over. You're not allowed to purchase more chips. Just because I am insanely wealthy doesn't mean I can sit down at a competitive poker table with more chips than everybody else and take their chips just because I can play different strategies because I have significantly more chips than they do. You can limit the capped amount of power. So spending gives players more options rather than more power. This is something like in collectible card games, you can purchase additional packs. That increases the number of cards you can use to construct decks, but there's still a cap to the power of the decks that you can construct by using the best synergies that are available. And that way you're still limiting the spending, and people who are the whales might be those who have the ability to adapt to the meta a little bit better, but they're not going to perform better when it comes down to sitting down and playing with someone who has just spent to construct their one deck that is the only cards that they own. You could provide what we call competitive gates using ranking or matching algorithms to play against players that are equally powerful. So the whales would play against the whales in an attempt to say, I am at the top of the whales leaderboard. And there would be separate leaderboards for free-to-play players. And that way you could be at the top of the free-to-play leaderboard in a way that allows you to have a similar sense of accomplishment that says that I did this without spending any money in this game whatsoever. So also just matchmaking in general means that you're playing against players of your relative power level. And it means that things are going to be equal, everything else considered. So if you pay for an advantage, you're pitted against other players who have paid for an advantage. There's also survival of the richest, where designers just don't try to balance at all and let people pay for power, and those who pay will be more powerful than those who don't pay. And you just accept that as an outcome of your game. If people aren't willing to pay as much, sucks to suck. We don't want you playing our game as much. Yeah. Turns out that last one leads to the highest profit. What does that say about our society? Wait, this isn't a psychology class. So thinking about just when each of these different strategies work, there are different games, different genres where each of these ideas makes more sense than the others. But just again, having tools in your design belt for monetizing your game, putting together an economy based on how you want your players to interact in order to do the best they can within your system and still have fun while doing it.
Part of me wants to see one of these survival of the richest companies just like come out with like the most like put like the best graphics, just amazing game on Steam for $20 with 0 microtransactions. They're like, hey, by the way, the reason we did that was so we could make this. I just want to see that.
Yeah,
so
right.
bad, you know.
Just a giant middle finger to everyone who spent a bunch of money on their game.
Yeah, just like no, completely different game. Just saying like the reason we were gouging it was so we could make something really awesome. Yeah,
that would be cool.
We made the just most greedy predatory system ever. But we have also made the best game that's ever hit.
I just want to see one of these whale-like games go completely free to play.
Yeah.
At some point. If you spent $1 million on this game, loser. Now it's free for everyone.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're all effective for different reasons.
I mean, didn't EVE Online kind of do something sort of like that, where it used to be where you only could pay for it, there was no free to play option, and they
Yeah.
let you added that later on.
Yeah, I want to see it at a bigger level where it's the game, it is the absolute game, and it's the game where I don't know, it makes me want to look at the monetization of something like Diablo Immortal, where the highest of the high paying players have put billions of dollars into the game and then just release everything for free. Just giving them a giant middle finger of you spend for all of this competitive advantage, and this is just it's a statement. The statement of you're willing to just burn your money, throw it away. What was it actually worth?
I don't know exactly how some of it's not quite as safe, but I know I think in the last year or something, I go to CSCD, which is had battle pass there,
Yeah.
monetary system. Had like a hacker group that hacked in, dispersed like millions of credits to every player in the game. And I can't remember specifics, but for the reason why it was very difficult for them to attempt to do like a rollback on it, like it wasn't just done in one way.
Yeah,
So it couldn't just easily, we just set everyone back 12 hours. I don't remember
Right.
the specifics, but it was pretty much for 12 hours or for a few weeks, I think, where it's just, if you played the game, if you had an account for this trade, you just had access to everything for free pretty much. And anyone who paid, hundreds of dollars to open 6 trillion loot packs to get those down. So like Black Ice or whatever skin it's called.
yeah,
Well, it sucks to suck.
yeah. So how do trades work in open economies? If players can spend real money for premium items, and then you can trade those premium items, we have to consider some additional things, like the fact that there is going to be a reverse market, players trading in-game items for money. If you don't support it on your own site, there will be some third-party site where this is possible to do. And if that is possible to do, then that is not the only way to acquire the good items in the game. So that can start to affect the developers' profit from the game that they're making. So developers spend quite a bit of resource trying to shut down third-party sites that do this. So be aware of, if you're going to add an open economy, you should have a plan for how to deal with the reverse market that is going to form, where players are botting, getting a bunch of in-game resources and attempting to trade those in-game resources for items of value. And if players can sell items cheaper than the cost to acquire them from the in-game store, then that's a potential sale that you've lost from that transaction, because they're acquiring the item that they would have otherwise purchased directly from you, and instead they're getting it from the open economy that you created, that you designed for yourself. So it's just something that you should be aware of. Of course, you can do this. A lot of games make items, premium items, untradeable. And if you do this, then if you spend money for something, then you don't do that so that you can trade it later. You do it so that your account can use it and it becomes account bound. So that's one way around this. If you do this in your terms of service, then you can use legal resources to go after any third-party sites or players who are attempting to circumvent those terms of service. Enforcing it is a bit difficult, but you can ban those who are caught. And then there's a fear among the player base of, if I engage with this, I may be caught. And if I am caught, then I will be banned. Issue from there, stop it. We want to minimize false positives with this. We don't want to ban users who aren't doing this. So if you're using any artificial intelligence or using data or data collection, again, we talked a bit about false positives in this sense, is making sure that you're not unfairly punishing players who are playing your game according to the terms of service and the rules. That will lead to some further problems. Your customer support has to handle those cases, any appeals, any legal issues that arise from that, social media or review challenges as your game starts to have a reputation for unfairly banning players. Designers can allow it but fail to support it. Something like if you engage in third-party trading, we don't support that. If you are scammed in doing that, sorry. And in that way, developers have even been known to create their own third-party sites that are sketchy in order to try to create a system that seems like, from a player's perspective, engaging in this is going to be sketchy. You might just lose your investment without getting the item in exchange. So players agree to an exchange and one player screws the other over. It's not officially supported. You're not going to get your currency back. Sucks. You could also allow and support it. That's another option where you just say it's a free economy. The only way to produce this item is through a real money transaction. But what happens after that, whether you sell it back for real money or not, we don't care. Just allow it and support it. We need to be careful about if we do allow for player trades, we do need systems in place to prevent things like lower level characters from buying and using higher level gear. Of course, you could add level restrictions on items. You could make some items completely untradeable. One other thing to be concerned about is if botting is something that is possible, and especially if there are shared resources between characters, you can ban a character, have that same account make another account or another character, and continue to trade between the account that has the value, trade it to an account that was just created to go sell it. If they're caught, then they're banned, but they were banned with nothing on them, and the account that was doing the trading is still out there and is able to make additional accounts and continue to engage with that practice. So that happens frequently. We're finally through it. We talked a lot about economic systems, but I feel like in very big games that are out there, this is becoming a bigger and bigger part of what it means to engage in a long-term game. And games are becoming less and less something you develop and sell and becoming more and more live service. So it's worth talking about all of the issues that come with live service games. All right. We're going to go into a little bit of trading systems because how you implement a trading system can completely change how your game is perceived. So we'll start with an introduction to just why players would care to trade at all. There are multiple resources in a game. Each resource has a value to each player at a particular time point. And so each player is willing to exchange between resources at different amounts at different times. And the economy is based on the fact that when you can find someone for whom, for the two resources, the other player has one that is more valuable, then you get a mutually beneficial trade. Something that both players want to engage in at a rate that seems like a good deal to both parties. So yeah, when there are differences between player valuations of resources, players want to trade some of the resource they have and value less for one someone else has that they value more. So this has effects for all involved players. We call the trade mutually beneficial. Each party feels like they are getting more than they are giving up. And that's just based on their current resource allocation, their current character's position in the game, their power level, what they need in order to be able to improve. Games can support different ways for players to agree on trades. So many games have a built-in trading system. You can add in negotiation before trades are finalized. You could add that you can post, I would like to exchange this for that, and then wait for someone to agree on an asynchronous other side where that trade gets posted. Do you want to allow trades of items for items, or do you want to have an intermediary liquid resource like gold that you trade items for gold and then gold for other items? And that way, you don't need to find someone who immediately needs your item. You just need to find someone who wants to purchase your item. That means that trades are going to be more frequent. If we go into something like a barter system, I would need to find one of you who wants the item that I have and also has the item that I want. That's going to have a multiplicative effect and be particularly unlikely. On the other hand, if I want to sell this item because I don't need it, all of you would have money or gold, and any one of you who wants this item would be willing to purchase it. Now that I have the gold, if any one of you have the item that I want, I can trade the gold for that item. So it facilitates a much easier trading system when you have some liquid middle ground currency that can be used in those trades. Trading system is a interesting negative feedback loop. What I mean with that is that players are incentivized to trade with players who are behind them. So something like my item that I have doesn't greatly affect my chances to win against them. So it could give me an edge over players that I'm currently directly competing with. A player that's behind, you can trade a resource that helps them catch up in a way that is not meaningful to your chance to win. It's greatly beneficial to them because it gains them a lot of the way up to being competitive. And you get a slight benefit out of that that is a competitive advantage against the players that you're directly competing against. So that creates an interesting negative feedback loop and a catch-up system for players who are behind. When you can agree to a one-on-one trade like that, the player who actually has the most power in that sense is actually the player who is furthest behind, who has any resource that a player who is competing to win wants. They can negotiate a pretty hefty deal for themselves because the benefit that other players are giving to them doesn't directly affect their competition. So players who are behind can hold out for a good deal if they hoard the resource that's valuable to those who are ahead of them. Intriguing way to set up a game, intriguing way to set up items in a system. If you have a trading system, trades imply that the people who own the items before the trade, it implies that they owned those items. Each party exchanges something that they owned for something that they will take ownership of. On the other hand, gifts don't necessarily imply ownership. If wealthy players can gift resources to a newer player to help them to build a relationship that would help them in the future, as they catch up, then the goodwill from the speed at which they help them get through the rest of the game may be repaid in terms of something that they could help them with, time that they would farm in the end game, something of the sort. Lots of free-to-play games allow you to gift items that you do not own to other players. So something like, I give you a welcome gift or a login gift that you cannot use yourself on your own account. But once you gift it to somebody else, they can use it on their account. So the good is completely useless to you, but when you give it to somebody else, there's value in the fact that you gave it to them. So you can trade it for some goodwill or to build a social connection with another player. So this can create opportunities for bartering, negotiation, exchange of goodwill. So gifts can be, I find that gifts are a very underutilized system in a lot of multiplayer games. So they can create a lot of what social gamers are trying to get out of the games that they play. All right, how do direct trades work? We need limits on what can and cannot be traded. So what items are restricted from being traded, have a limited quantity of trade that's available, strictly not allowed to be traded. Things like quest items are typically not allowed to be traded. If you could go complete the quest and then trade the quest item to someone else and then go complete the quest again and then trade the quest item to someone else, then the other players are bypassing doing the quest in the game in a way that might be unfair from a developer's perspective. Yeah.
The shared stash, back to Diablo 2, it's really on the line right now. But the shared stash in Diablo 2 used to be the only way you used to be able to trade things. So you'd have to put things in the shared stash. And so speedrunners were buying the items you needed to complete the quest, putting them in the shared stash. So the way Blizzard dealt with that was they just prevented all quest items from being able to be put into the shared stash.
Right.
So simple,
Yeah.
easy
ways that you can do that.
Yeah.
If players are making use of the system in a way that you didn't intend, you have to go fix that or deal with the consequences of your players being able to do that. You can also prolong play through trades. So limiting those trades can help you to add a layer of strategy or timing to trades. When is it appropriate for me to trade away this limited, I can only trade so much of this item? When should I do that? It creates the strategy around how to maximize the return on investment. So you could either limit the number of players you could trade with, or limit the number of trades per turn or total. And this is especially useful in board games where you create the strategy of when am I going to get the most use out of the trades that I am allotted within the game. So can elongate gameplay because you don't have completely free trade, but on the other hand, it can also prevent exploitation. So you can add mechanics to keep people from circumventing your rules. So things like how many accounts is one player allowed to have at once? If it's more than one, you allow for trades between accounts that you own. How are you going to determine whether that is happening if you don't want to allow it, or limit it if you do want to allow it and keep it limited? Or do you allow players to do things like farm a very high level character and then have they make a new character and they can use the best items that they found with their high level character that are level appropriate? Maybe that's something that you want to allow. Maybe it's something that you don't. It's something that you should certainly consider. You can add a trade holding system where trades are reviewed before the trade is authorized. That can either be a developer who is authorizing the trade. It could be another player who says, I'm going to make sure that I'm not being scammed. Just leave 5 seconds for players to review the trade. I have to click and I completely agree. This is the item that I'm looking to trade for. And you want to minimize the effect of scammers in this sense. Someone who is saying, I'm giving you this item, but it's not actually that item. It's one that looks like that item, or it's one that has a similar benefit to that item, but not quite as good. You can also, the last thing I'll talk about, prevent king making. Add mechanics that prevent losing players from trading all of their resources to another player to help them win. So all kinds of things that you want to consider with indirect trades. We'll come back and talk about this more tomorrow.